You believed that being smart would be enough, that being the best would be enough to be happy. But no one told you the truth. Too much intelligence without soul becomes a prison. Maybe the question you're asking yourself now is about this emptiness, this feeling of being lost, or where did all that intelligence go? Know that this is nothing more than a scream, and those who ignore this scream spend their whole lives trying to fix something that was never broken. Feeling lost even while being intelligent is a sign that the old persona needs to be overcome. It's not a flaw. It's the beginning of true individuation, where the soul demands a more real life and not just an idealized image. In this video, you'll understand why this crisis that scares you is actually the first proof that you're ready to truly be born, to leave the mask behind and finally become whole. So, watch until the end and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you have ever felt this way, even knowing you're capable, even remembering all those times you were called smart, know that this isn't a mistake along the way. Nor is it a sign of weakness. It's a much more common human experience than it seems. Many of us grew up hearing that we were special, that we had something extra, a brilliant mind, a sharp perception, an ease in understanding what seemed complicated to others. Every compliment came loaded with love, with hope, but also without anyone meaning harm came seeds of invisible expectations. Grow, become someone, prove what everyone saw in you. Time passed. Life showed its real face, rougher, more unpredictable, less fair than school books made it seem. And then suddenly that praised child looks into the mirror of a tired adult and asks, "Where did all that they said I was go?" That disconnection hurts. It feels like an internal betrayal, a secret flaw you try to hide even from yourself. But maybe it's not a flaw. Maybe it's a calling, an invitation from the soul itself to go beyond the image created in childhood. Life pushes us to frontiers where the intelligence that once defined us is no longer enough, where the question shifts from what do I know to who am I? Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists, what you accept transforms." Maybe the discomfort you feel now is exactly that, a part of you denied for so long, knocking at the door, asking to be seen, to be welcomed. It's not a mistake to feel lost. Sometimes it's the only way to truly find yourself. When the easy paths disappear, when the old applause becomes a distant echo, what remains is the opportunity to build a life that is truly yours, and not just a response to old expectations. And to understand how we got here, we need to look back a little. To look with kindness at that child who, after being called smart so many times, started to believe they had to be perfect to deserve love. From a very young age, we learn that the world pays attention to certain parts of us and ignores others. To survive this invisible filter, we create masks, some made of strength, others of kindness, others of intelligence. The small adaptations that at first seemed natural, smiling to receive affection, succeeding to be recognized, shining to not be forgotten. If you grew up hearing that you were smart, quick, above average, it's likely that this image became an armor, a protection against the fear of not being good enough. Without realizing it, the child you once were started to put intelligence ahead of everything, like a badge, a pass for love, for the pride in the eyes of those around them. It was a brilliant adaptation, and it was the best you could do with the resources you had. No child has the full awareness to understand that the approval they received wasn't a lifelong identity contract. No child knows that by being praised only for one aspect, even if an incredible one, they are slowly being separated from the rest of themselves. It wasn't your fault. It was the best you could do at that time. Intelligence became a starting point, but also an illusory finish line. Little by little, instead of simply thinking and creating, you started measuring yourself. Everything had to confirm that initial idea, I am smart. And if something threatened that narrative, a mistake, a doubt, a failure, fear would arise. As if failing even once could invalidate everything you are. Carl Jung called these constructions the persona, the social masks we all wear to live in society. According to him, the persona is necessary. It allows us to interact, to belong, to create bonds. Without it, we would be too raw for the world. But the problem arises when we forget we are wearing a mask, when we confuse the function with the essence. The persona of the smart child is, at first light, almost invisible, a natural impulse to show the best to receive acceptance. But over time, if not seen with awareness, it solidifies. It turns from a choice into a prison. Intelligence stops being a tool and becomes a burden, something that must be constantly proven with every challenge, with every external look. And the more we depend on that mask to feel valid, the more afraid we become of letting it fall. The more we distance ourselves from the parts of us that don't fit into that idealized portrait. Confusion, tiredness, doubt, mistakes, as if admitting that we are much more than just smart would betray those who believed in us. Maybe without noticing, you started to measure your worth not by who you are, but by how well you can keep that constructed image alive. As if being seen as anything less would mean disappearing. As if making a mistake would mean being forgot. But every persona, no matter how well built, one day must be overcome, not because it's fake, but because it's incomplete. What lies beyond the mask is much greater, much more alive than what the persona tried to protect. And that's where a powerful transformation begins. When we accept that the smart child was an important chapter, but adulthood demands a different story, a broader, more truthful one, a story that doesn't start by proving anything to anyone. When we grow up surrounded by praise and expectations, ease becomes a standard, something that's not just admired but expected. Solving problems quickly, understanding effortlessly, getting it right on the first try. That initial sense of mastery is intoxicating. And without realizing it, it teaches us something dangerous, that difficulties are a sign of failure, not growth. What starts as a gift turns into an invisible trap, a golden prison, beautiful on the outside, suffocating on the inside. The world taught us to associate value with immediate performance. If it was easy before, it should always be easy. If it's not, something must be wrong. Few people notice the weight of that contract. Intelligence, which once seemed like a gift, becomes an elegant prison, a cell where making mistakes is unacceptable. Trying and failing is humiliating, and any sign of effort feels like weakness. And then, without warning, fear begins to seep in. First, we avoid unfamiliar ground. Then we start choosing only what we already know we can do well. Finally, we stop trying altogether. I knew someone who fell into this trap in a brutal way. He was one of those brilliant students who always got the best grades, solving problems that seemed impossible to his classmates. Everyone expected him to go far, and he did up to a point. In college, he faced tough subjects for the first time. It wasn't automatic anymore. It wasn't easy. And instead of seeking help or adjusting to the new pace of learning, he withdrew. He avoided challenges, changed majors, and eventually dropped out. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he lacked the internal permission to be a beginner again. The problem was never making mistakes. The problem was what mistakes represented, the collapse of the identity that had sustained him for so long. This is the ego inflation Jung spoke about, not an arrogant, boastful ego, but an ego too vulnerable to accept that difficulty doesn't diminish anyone. That failure is just another language of learning. When ease becomes the measuring stick, any effort feels humiliating, as if needing to learn were a personal disgrace. And so, instead of growing, we get stuck, trapped in the safe zone of what we already know, what we've already mastered, while the outside world, full of new possibilities, drifts further and further away. This prison isn't made of bars, it's made of invisible beliefs. And the pain doesn't just come from stagnation, but from the intuition that we're betraying something inside ourselves, something that wanted more than to repeat old victories, something that wanted to take risks, to discover, to reinvent itself. Acknowledging that pain is the first step out of the cell, because it shows that behind the mask of ease there is still a living soul, a soul that doesn't just want to win, but wants to truly live. And it's at this point that we start to find something we've avoided for a long time: vulnerability. Not as weakness, but as the key to a more authentic path. But if this intellectual armor protects us, what happens to everything we hide behind it? What did you leave behind to be the smart one? Somewhere along the way, we learned that showing weakness was dangerous, that failing was synonymous with being diminished, that making mistakes meant disappointing those who believed in us. And then, without even realizing it, we started hiding entire parts of ourselves, not just from others, but from ourselves. Carl Jung called this set of rejections the shadow, everything we judge as unworthy. Everything that doesn't fit the image we want to show the world gets pushed into the darkness of our consciousness. Fragility, shame, fear, confusion, they don't disappear, they just hide. But what's repressed doesn't die, it just waits. On the outside, we try to maintain the image: smart, capable, always ready. On the inside, we carry a fear. The fear of being discovered, of someone seeing what we fought so hard to hide, of someone realizing that beneath the quick answers and brilliant results, there is also doubt, insecurity, exhaustion. The fear of making mistakes is actually the fear of being seen as ordinary, as someone who tries, fails, learns, and tries again like everyone else. And for someone who was trained from an early age to be above average, that's a terrifying thought to admit. But the truth is that real greatness doesn't come from denying our shadow. It comes from acceptance, from recognizing that we are made of both light and darkness, strength and failure, certainty and confusion, that we are not less valuable for being human. Deep spirituality doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for wholeness. And being whole means embracing even what we would rather hide. If you want to start this process, and the truth is it has already started or you wouldn't be here, here's a simple but powerful suggestion. Set aside some time to reflect on which aspects of yourself you most avoid showing. It's not to judge yourself, it's not to correct yourself, it's just to look like someone gently turning on a light in a long closed room. Ask yourself, which parts of me do I hide from others? Which parts do I hide even from myself? Where did the idea come from that these parts don't deserve to be seen? Writing these answers down, even loosely, without worrying about concluding anything, can be an act of immense courage. Because every piece you accept stops being an enemy. It stops fighting against you from the shadows and starts becoming part of who you are. Someone who, instead of striving to be perfect, chooses to be real. It's this movement of accepting what once seemed unacceptable that begins to rebuild real self-trust. Not the trust of someone who never falls, but the trust of someone who knows that even after falling, they are still worthy of walking. When vulnerability becomes a risk we cannot afford to take, we end up seeking shelter where we feel strongest, in the mind. The intellect becomes not just a tool but a shield. We think to control, we think to predict, we think to avoid what feeling could expose us to. And so, without realizing it, we let thinking take the place of feeling. We start calculating life. We analyze people, situations, ourselves as if they were equations to be solved, not mysteries to be lived. This creates a type of empathy that is functional but not alive. Cognitive empathy understands what the other feels. It recognizes the logic behind emotion, but it doesn't feel alongside. It doesn't allow itself to be touched. Without vulnerability, there is no real communion between souls. There are only exchanges of ideas, superficial connections, encounters that touch the skin but not the heart. And little by little, loneliness sets in, not physical loneliness. We are surrounded by colleagues, friends, acquaintances, but the harder loneliness to name, the sense that no one truly reaches us, that even in a crowded room we are isolated inside a castle we built ourselves, stone by stone, thought by thought. Maybe you felt this sitting in a circle, laughing at the right moments, understanding every nuance, and still feeling like something is missing, an invisible bridge that wasn't crossed, a distance that intellect cannot eliminate because only feeling can bridge it. This loneliness hurts because it touches an essential truth. We weren't made just to be understood, we were made to be felt. The mind can keep us safe, but only the heart keeps us alive. And opening the heart after so long hidden is scary because it means risking being seen, being hurt, being rejected. But it also means, for the first time in a long time, the real chance of being truly loved. Not for the mask, not for the performance, but for what is most naked and true in us. The mind gave us shelter. Now it's the heart that must lead us forward. But when the loneliness hurts too much, what do? We return to what we know best. We try to think our way out. But does that really work? When emotional pain arises, our first response is often the one we know best. Thinking, searching for solutions, strategies, explanations, as if sadness were a logical problem, as if the inner emptiness could be solved with the right sequence of steps. We try to map the heart as if it were a maze that intelligence could conquer. We try to reason where we should simply feel, and the more we think, the further away the peace we seek seems to get. Carl Jung explained that emotions do not belong to the realm of conscious reasoning. They arise from the unconscious, from layers so deep that intellect alone can never reach them. Emotions cannot be fixed with arguments. They need to be lived, recognized, honored. But for those who spend a lifetime being valued for their mind, that sounds almost like heresy. Feeling seems dangerous, irrational, inefficient. So we try to solve feeling by thinking even harder. We try to find an explanation that anesthetizes the pain. We try to understand so we won't have to face the raw discomfort of pure emotion. It's not a lack of courage. Quite the opposite. The attempt to heal the heart through reason is in itself an act of bravery. You tried every way you knew. You did the best you could with the tools you had. And maybe it's time to allow yourself something new. Stop trying to understand everything and simply be with what you feel without needing to fix it, without needing to explain. This doesn't mean drowning in pain. It means recognizing that pain, when listened to with respect, begins to transform on its own. Emotions are like rivers. If we try to dam them, we create pressure. If we allow them to flow, even slowly, they find their own course toward healing. It may feel strange, even uncomfortable, being with what hurts without trying to speed up the process, without trying to prove you've already moved on. But it's in this naked space, where the mind falls silent and the heart breathes, that true healing begins to happen. For the first time, perhaps, without needing to be brilliant, without needing to be strong, just by being human. And it's in this surrender that we find something thought could never give us. The feeling that, even without understanding everything, we are exactly where we are supposed to be. When the pain of disconnection becomes too intense to bear, sometimes the mind builds one last line of defense. The idea that we are above, not above out of hollow arrogance, but as a desperate attempt to make loneliness more bearable. If no one seems to understand us, if the feeling of isolation hurts more than we can admit, it becomes easier to believe that the problem lies with others, that we are different, deeper, more aware, more prepared. A subtle way to protect what's left of a threatened self-esteem. Jung called this movement the inflation of the ego, a survival mechanism of the psyche, inflating to avoid sinking, building a narrative of superiority to cushion the pain of exclusion. But this protection comes at a cost. The more we convince ourselves that others don't deserve access to our vulnerability, the more we isolate ourselves. And the more isolated we are, the more we need to keep that belief alive to justify the distance. It's a difficult cycle to break because it feels safe. It feels rational. It even feels noble, maintaining high standards, not mingling with superficialities, protecting one's own integrity. But deep down, it's fear of being rejected, fear of needing others and being disappointed again. True spirituality offers another direction: humility. Not the forced humility that wears a mask of false modesty, but the living humility that recognizes that no one, no matter how intelligent, sensitive, or capable, is complete alone. Humility is not about making yourself smaller. It's about making space for others to be different without that threatening who you are. It's accepting that real connection requires imperfection, both ours and others. Maybe you remember moments when, sensing you might be judged or misunderstood, you chose to retreat. You chose to raise an inner wall. You rationalized the distance. They wouldn't understand anyway. Maybe you avoided asking for help, sharing a doubt, admitting a vulnerability. These decisions were legitimate attempts to protect yourself, but over time they built layers of separation that now weigh heavy. The good news is that, just as those walls were built, they can be dismantled. Not with force, not with haste, but with small gestures of openness, admitting a doubt, sharing a fear, allowing someone to see, even just a glimpse, what you've guarded so carefully. Every act of humility is a bridge stretching toward real life where no one is perfect, but everyone is needed. Being reborn to yourself is not like flipping a page. It doesn't happen in a sudden flash of enlightenment. It's a process of deconstruction and reconstruction, a journey that begins when we realize that what has defined us until now, intelligence, strength, performance, is no longer enough to sustain who we are becoming. Carl Jung called this path individuation, the process of integrating all parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow, to discover who we are beyond the persona. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about reclaiming old, forgotten, rejected parts, bringing into the center of consciousness everything we were taught to hide: vulnerability, fear, doubt, the desire to belong without needing to earn it. To individuate is to step down from the pedestal we built to survive. It's accepting that not being understood is sometimes part of the deal, that not having all the answers doesn't diminish our worth, that life demands more truth than perfection. And the hardest part, realizing that no one is going to do this work for us. No degree, no praise, no external recognition can replace the inner work of embracing who we really are. This process requires courage, but not the cinematic kind of courage in grand gestures. It requires the subtle bravery of facing the discomfort of looking inward, questioning old certainties, recognizing that the image we sold to the world no longer fits us like it once did. It's a rebirth that often happens in solitude, in doubt, in the feeling of being lost. And yet it's there that something new begins to breathe, something more authentic, more whole. The soul doesn't want us to be perfect, it wants us to be real, and every step along this path is a choice, to keep defending the mask or to start, little by little, trusting in the strength of showing the naked face with all the marks of time and experience. With each layer we remove from our constructed identity, we find an older one waiting to be seen. It's a work of rescue, reclaiming the inner voice that was muffled by years of adaptation, by the search for approval, by the need to meet expectations. And along this process, doubt becomes a faithful companion. Not knowing where to go, who we are, what we want, all of it is part of the journey. They're not signs of failure, but proof that we are crossing over, that something inside us refuses to accept a life molded only by what others projected onto us. Often, when starting the individuation process, we miss solid ground. The old security, being the smart one, the competent one, the infallible one, begins to crumble. And before something new is built, there is an empty space, a silence where the old ego screams, tries to negotiate, tries to regain control. But it's in this emptiness that possibilities are born. It's in the moment when we no longer know who we are supposed to be that we can finally discover who we truly are. Individuation, then, is not a race. It's not a goal, it's a personal pilgrimage, a path walked more with the heart than with the feet. Every stumble, every uncertainty, every step back, all of it belongs. Nothing is wasted. Only those who allow themselves to lose the old can find what is true. One of the first steps to this rebirth is simple in theory, but challenging in practice. Doing new things and allowing yourself to fail on purpose, not as a punishment, but as liberation. Choosing something in which you are not an expert, something that demands being a beginner again. Cooking a difficult recipe, learning an instrument, starting a new sport, speaking in public, whatever it is. The activity itself doesn't matter. What matters is the gesture, telling yourself that you don't need to be perfect to exist, to belong, to be worthy. The mistake, which once seemed like a threat, now becomes a silent teacher. It teaches that you don't need to carry the weight of old expectations. It teaches that you can fall and still remain whole. Another essential move is accepting the deconstruction of the idealized image you built. That character who always knew, always got it right, always handled everything. It's not about destroying it with anger, but thanking it. It was necessary. It helped protect you for a long time, but now it can rest. Letting go of this image doesn't mean becoming someone lesser. It means becoming more real, allowing yourself to be complex, contradictory, full of nuances, allowing yourself to be human. Individuation also calls for building new ways of connecting, not with masks, not to impress or protect yourself, but to share who you are, even when that feels small, confusing, imperfect. Real connection doesn't happen in moments of victory. It happens in the sharing of doubts, fears, and fragile hopes. The vulnerability we fear so much is, in fact, the bridge that connects us to others. Opening up to new relationships or deepening old ones under a more honest light is a daily exercise in courage. It won't always be comfortable. It won't always be received the way we would like, but every genuine attempt is a silent affirmation. You are choosing to live with greater integrity. The path to individuation is long, sometimes slow, but with every step you move closer to something no external achievement could ever offer, the deep feeling of being whole within your own skin. There are no visible awards on this path. The recognition is internal, intimate, invisible to the eyes, and that's precisely